In a time when idiocracy has arrived and politicians do nothing but lie and fight over power, two men rose up from the ashes with a message to unite everyone.
Mind your damn business. Hey guys, welcome to Mind Your Damn Business, episode 2 here. We have a special guest on today. He's the leader of the Canadian Libertarian Party, fireman, and just an all-around good citizen. He does a lot of good charity work and everything all around Canada. Tim Moen. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, thanks to be on your show. I'm hoping you're not minding my business here, but I'm going to be an open book. You know,
Perfect.
My business is your business on this podcast.
Well, as long as you're willing to broadcast your business, then we don't mind. We just don't want people just poking their nose in. That's all. Mainly government.
Yeah.
So what do you think of the current situation with this whole COVID-19 thing? You know, a lot of rumors swirling around of what it could be, what it is. You know, government overreacting. We obviously have our views on that. Just, you know, title of the show probably should show you.
It's nutty. I mean, it's kind of a litmus test to me as to where we are in terms of our culture, our society. You know, there's that old saying that hard times create hard men. Hard men create good times create soft men. You know, I think we're at the soft men stage, and you know, this virus is the thing that concerns me the most is obviously the government reaction to it. You know, as a libertarian, I think that even if the virus had 100% fatality rate, you should be free to go and try to get food and try to survive. You shouldn't have the means of survival taken from you. People should be able to manage their own risks. And this virus certainly doesn't approach anywhere near that. And so, you know, I've been opposed to these lockdowns from the beginning. You know, I think that people, you know, if you want to stay safe, you can wrap yourself in a bubble. You can stay home. You don't have to leave your house. But as soon as you leave your house, you're exposing yourself to some risk, whether that's driving on the streets, whether that's coming into contact with other people that might have a virus. You're taking on some risks. And so, you know, I don't have anyone to blame but myself if I get sick, and I'm willing to take that risk. And in fact, with my job, I'm a firefighter paramedic, and, you know, I'm dealing with sick people all day long. I'm going into viral loads. So if this thing so I have to make a risk assessment before I even go to work. Do I want to go to work today? Should I quit my job? Is it too dangerous? Is my life in such jeopardy that I shouldn't go to work? Because I'm exposing myself to risk far more than the average person who leaves their home to run their business or go to work. Yet, you know, to me, the risk of unemployment outweighs the risk of dying from this virus. Now, in 25 years, when I have a bunch of comorbidities and I packed on some more weight and I have a nice retirement fund, you know, would the risk to go into work be great? You know, I might quit work at that point and say, you know what, I'm gonna retire, and the risk of unemployment isn't that bad. I have enough saved up. So everyone needs to be able to manage their own risk based on their own specific life context and their own situation. And, you know, I know that people that want to lock this down, they're talking about compassion and all that kind of thing, that we're exposing people to risk in nursing homes. I'm not sure how the math works on that. I'm not sure how me going and get groceries or going to the movie theater is exposing someone in a nursing home to risk. It's the people that are actually going into the nursing homes that are exposing those people to risk. But even if imagine, put yourself in the shoes of a nursing home resident. Okay, you have a few years to live, maybe a few months to live. Do you want to spend that time locked down, or would you rather risk having a slightly shortened life but having your family around you, hugging you. I think that should also be on, it should be up to the individual in the nursing home, whether they want to expose themselves to that risk or not. So yes, if we don't go under complete, utter lockdown and have our lives shut down, will the death rate be higher from things like car accidents and viruses and different things like that? Of course it will. But as a libertarian, I think people need to be able to take the risk for themselves, because there's a risk of not doing nothing. There's a risk of staying locked down forever. I mean, at some point you need to get food. There's also, life needs to be worth living as well. I mean, what's the point in living if you can't live life? So, there's just so many things that are wrong about this from a philosophical perspective and an ethical perspective.
Well,
sorry, go ahead, Greg.
Sorry. Well, I think there's also a problem with giving the power to a central organization over what you can and can't do, and let them make the rules. As we see that in New York, where Como made that rule where the COVID patients were in old folks' homes were made to take COVID patients into the old folks' homes. Right. And that actually caused more deaths and caused more problems, but that gave the power to the state.
And I don't know if you saw the news here in Canada lately. The armed forces put out a report, because they've been helping out with these COVID cases in the nursing homes, and they've just released a report that is just astounding, the amount of abuse, neglect, and downright torture that these residents are subjected to. Now, 82% of Canada's COVID deaths have occurred in nursing homes, in long-term care facilities. And I have to wonder if, instead of locking down the whole country to protect nursing home people who are going to die from this virus, what if we just didn't abuse, torture, and neglect these nursing home people? What if we treated them right? What if we actually, if our job is to protect them, that we actually protect them? How many lives would that save? It's just atrocious what's going on. We are ruining lives while we're not protecting the most vulnerable. And we're ruining lives in the name, supposedly, of protecting the most vulnerable. But meanwhile, we're abusing them, neglecting them, and torturing them. I mean, this is evil on every level.
Now, go ahead, Marco.
Sorry, what I was going to say was, what my worry too now is, what it's going to do is it's going to set things back a little bit for the liberty movement, because recently I was reading an article that said a lot of these abuses are happening in for-profit facilities. Whether that's true or not, we can dig into that. But now, as you were saying, Tim, with the military report, now there seems to be a push for, well, now the government's got to get involved, right? Trudeau just came out, nothing's off the table. Ford's going to have a potential criminal investigation going on. So now are they doing the stereotypical, twirling the mustache, laughing like maniacal capitalists and doing everything they can for profit? Or is there something that goes beyond that? And I mean, I doubt that these government facilities are perfect either, right? And now we're in a situation where, with this COVID thing, people are so scared, as you were saying, with risks. Now they're all scared because, oh my God, if I leave my house, people are dying. Every time I read, people are dying. I have to stay locked up like caged animals. And it's just so tough to break that mentality. Like, any strategies on how to break that?
Man, I wish I knew. I mean, this is the age-old strategy. This is the problem we've been facing as a liberty movement for as long as I've been in it, is how do you break people out of their complacency? And I just see complacency and softness accelerating. It's not getting any better, right? Like, what incentive is there for anyone who's been living a comfortable life under this lockdown on money being printed by central banks and tax money being redistributed? What incentive is there for these people to go and now work, right? I mean, why would they, if they can live the same comfortable lifestyle that they've been living under lockdown? And I mean, I have to admit, like, my life hasn't been affected all that much. Like, I'm an essential worker, which is another thing, and how the government can get away with saying that you're essential, you're not. I mean, that seems ridiculously discriminatory and just arbitrary. But the only thing I'm missing from, I like to go to the cinema. I like to watch movies in the theater, and I like to go have a beer with my buds every now and then, but I'm pretty much an introvert. I'm a homebody. I stay at home. I do my writing. I do my thinking. And like, nothing as much has changed for me. And I feel even myself I need to get more angry about this, because I'm a libertarian, and I've been fighting for this. And I'm a guy who has given up his pension, who has given up his job, who's done all these sacrifices for the cause of liberty. And if even I'm feeling a little bit kind of complacent and like, it's no big deal, then how much can I expect from my neighbor who's in the same boat, who doesn't really have a political dog in the fight, going to feel about this, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, ultimately, I think there's two things that are going to happen. I think what ultimately is going to happen is a much greater divide. I mean, we've been seeing political and societal fracturing accelerate over the last few years. Civil discourse is gone. It's now us versus them in all tribes, and this virus, this pandemic, and the government response to us is accelerating that. So you're going to have the people whose lives are dramatically affected, who are losing their businesses and their houses and their jobs and are unemployed, and their reason for living is being stripped from them. And then you're going to have the people that are comfortable, that are looking at the science and whatever. And these people are going to become more and more enemies, right? And that's what the real problem is, because there's going to be a camp that is going to wake up and understand, this is complete and utter BS. That this lockdown is ruining people. It's killing more people than it's saving, and we need to limit government. And then there's going to be the people that are going to, just like you said, they're going to look at examples like these nursing homes and say, oh, this is why we have to nationalize nursing homes, and this is why we have to nationalize education. And oh, by the way, look at how well these lockdowns worked. Imagine how this could avert climate catastrophe. If the lockdowns averted a pandemic catastrophe, something similar could avert climate catastrophe. And don't doubt that those excuses are going to be used to bolster giant global statism, right? And these are going to be the two competing factions, and they're going to be even more firm in their convictions. All the people that are wishy-washy in the middle, that could go one way or the other based on arguments, they're going to be separated into one of these two camps and fall firmly in there and be hard fast in their convictions. So how do we deal with that? And I don't know. I think this is the beginning of the end of Western civilization. Things are going to crumble, and the job of the libertarian. It used to be, I thought that, if I just said the right words, maybe I could influence and change the world, right? And I'm more and more skeptic on that. And yet I still do this. And one of the reasons I do this is because, Albert J. Nock wrote this great essay back in the 30s called Isaiah's Job. And Isaiah was a prophet in the Old Testament, and he was going out and his job was to warn everyone about the upcoming catastrophe that was about to befall them. And he said, God, no one's listening to me. Like, no one is paying any attention to me. They're still carrying on. That nobody's changing. They're not changing course. The nation's still carrying on the way it is. And God said, look, your job to change their minds. Your job is to preach to the remnant. There's people out there that believe like you do. They may be, flying under the radar. They may have not kind of forgotten what's going on, but they're the remnant. Your job is to preach to them, to minister to them, to encourage them, because when everything falls apart, those are the people that are going to rebuild civilization and rebuild order. And so that's kind of what I look at our job is now. There's probably no turning this thing around. We are on the Titanic. We've already hit the iceberg. Things are sinking, and that sinking is starting to accelerate now. Our job is to get people into lifeboats and then find a pocket of area where we can rebuild civilization with like-minded people that understand what went wrong. The remnant.
That's it sounds pessimistic, but I mean, Greg and I were talking off air about that, and what else can you think, right? I mean, there seems to be a real trend for more government grasping for more. I mean, the fact that a minimum wage worker is taking in less per month than you can get if you were on CERB, I think that's pretty alarming. And it just speaks to, and people are okay with that. And there's just no, I don't know, Greg, if you have any thoughts on that, but I know that what's that? Go ahead.
Well, I think as the problem is our history. Canada has never fought for their sovereignty like other countries. Like almost every country in the world has at one point has a war over independence. Canada's never had that. Canada's not actually even fully independent, right? We still
Oh, don't even
have
get
to,
started.
right? And you know what I mean.
Well,
So
I mean, one evidence to that is that this gun ban lately in Canada was an order from the Governor General, right? Everyone
right,
thinks Trudeau issued this order. Well, in a roundabout way, he did. But
Yeah.
the thing that makes it legal and binding is that it came from the Queen's representative here in Canada, the
Yeah,
Governor
she signed
General.
off on it. Yeah.
that's right.
Issued the order. If she wasn't around that day, the order doesn't get signed and it doesn't come into law. If she was in space, I mean, she's a former astronaut or whatever. She was dropping a deuce for a long time. I mean, she just the order doesn't get signed. I mean, that order, the fact that our MPs, they don't swear allegiance to the Canadian people. They don't swear allegiance to our Constitution or a set of principles or Canadian values. They swear allegiance to the Queen and the royal family. That's where their loyalties are supposed to lie. So that if that doesn't, raise the hairs on the back of your head, I don't know what will.
That's right. So do you support the protests that are going on right now?
Yeah, I definitely think, well, I mean, define what you mean by support. I'm not much of one for protesting. I'll go out and speak at a protest sometimes. I always worry about that protests get co-opted by kind of like the most wacky and extreme people in a group of protesters. That's what the protest becomes about.
Yeah.
And I mean, we see this in the media. So like, there's a bunch of protesters in the States, and the ones that show up with, military looking rifles and are saying, I want a haircut, are the ones that get all the attention, when the mass majority are just people that want to get back to work, that don't want their lives ruined, all that kind of thing. And they're being reasonable and all that. So I'm always a little bit leery of protests, but of course, I think there should be some resistance and pushback, and people should voice their displeasure. And I think protests what protests can do is send a clear message to the political classes that there is a market here, a political market, to go in a different direction. And politicians, their job is not to lead, it's to get in front of the parade. It's to figure out which direction the parade's going and then get in front of it and pretend that they were going that direction all the time and they were the leader, right? And that's kind of what they do. So, and this is what we do in the Libertarian Party, is we understand the chances of us getting elected are pretty much zero. And, in order to get elected, you have to figure out which way the parade's going and get in front of it. Well, we think the parade's going the wrong direction. So we're sitting here in the back of the parade trying to figure out how we can influence the people in the parade to start marching another direction so that we get the kind of government we want. Because government comes from culture. It doesn't, so culture has to change before we see the kind of government we want. And politicians just aren't equipped to change culture in a positive direction.
I think the longer these lockdowns last and the longer things get worse, I think that's going to kind of shift that train to go in our direction a little more, because they're starting to see what government can do.
I think you're right. It definitely is going to shift things. I'm seeing it already. Like there's a lot of disenfranchised people out there. There's no politicians on the federal stage, which blows me away, that are speaking out about this. I mean, the opposition parties and the Conservatives are talking about how, the payouts are being done in an unfair way, or like they're just kind of nitpicking at tiny little things. No one's questioning the lockdown at all. No one is pushing back against it, and it's just astounding to me that this is happening. And I think one of the reasons why that is not because they're necessarily in the pockets of the globalists or any kind of conspiracy thing like that. If you look at the polls right now, the Liberal Party is like polling at 45%. The Conservatives are the next, and they're in the mid-20s or something like that, right? Why is the Liberal Party and Justin Trudeau doing so well? Well, it's because Canadians love this approach that government's taking to the lockdown. Okay, and the Conservatives know that if they want to get an even smaller market share of the vote, they should oppose the lockdown. So that's why they're being up right now, because they realize it's political suicide to oppose the lockdown. Again, it's a cultural problem. So what we need are courageous people to stand on the stage and oppose it from a principled perspective, not just because you want to get a haircut, but because it's evil to remove from people their means to survive in this world, survive, thrive, and be healthy in this world to save some people that could save themselves by just staying home.
Well, I do see that. I do see that growing every week, actually, with the protest. I don't know, in Ontario, anyways, in Toronto, more and more people are coming out. Doug Ford here, after the first protest, Doug Ford called us all yahoos, and that just after that, more and more people actually started coming out. So I think that movement is starting to grow. I think we'll see a big push on July 1st from people because we're so used to going out to like our Parliament building in Ottawa. They used to have big events. It's nice weather. I think this year is going to turn into a big protest on July 1st.
Hillary Clinton called people in the heartland deplorables. I mean, they just embrace the term. So maybe what we need is to be yahoos.
Maybe.
Look, his brother Doug was a Yahoo in chief, as far as I'm
Rob.
concerned.
Rob.
Yeah, Rob.
Yeah.
Right? Crack smoking,
But Rob did it different, right? You can look up videos of Rob going, "Look what our politicians get. We get free this, free this, free this, free this, right? Free zoo pass, free parking, free everything. Well, you guys have to pay for it, right?" So he did a lot of good that way by pointing that out. But he tried to. His downfall was trying to lower city council in Toronto, like lower the number of people, and that obviously didn't go over well with the city councilors who were afraid of losing their jobs. So that's and then they sent the media and everything else after Doug Ford.
And I mean, speaking of these different rules for politicians versus the rest of us, I mean, here we have members of parliament collecting a pay raise at the same time they're putting everyone else out of business and destroying their lives. And now we have the four main parties applying for wage subsidies, business bridging subsidies or whatever to help them get through the lower. I mean, it's just
it's funny though, eh? It's because their funding ran out, so now they need money. This kind of reminds me of all the bailouts. Businesses are going under, so the government bails us out. Well, now we're bailing out the government because no one wants to fund these idiots anymore. So they're asking us for more money. It's ridiculous. But another thing is, I don't know how the Libertarian Party would handle this, but we see like China, they're buying up a lot of these natural resource companies, like in the oil sands and their gold. I know the Libertarians' outlook is, and mainly mine too, is this: government should stay out of private deals. But when it's dealing with companies from China, who we all full know that is not a fully private company. If you're coming from China, like the government has hands all over their companies. So buying up natural resources obviously would bring a foreign government in play into our government with lobbying and everything. So how, as a Libertarian Party, would you handle foreign companies buying our natural resources?
Yeah, well, I think there's a definite argument to be made that certainly other governments shouldn't be buying our natural resources, right? Like it would be like selling to a criminal gang whose job was to kill and destroy people. And this is why, for example, I don't have much of a problem with blocking private sales to Saudi Arabia government. We have arms. Canadian companies build arms that then are used. We know they're going to be used to kill innocent people for, an ideology and a regime that is evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we can make a case that those kinds of things ought to be illegal, and that criminal organizations like other governments shouldn't be able to buy land in Canada. So it becomes a little bit more tricky now, and you can extend that then to, I think, crown corporations. A lot of Chinese businesses are actually essentially crown corporations.
That's right.
And I think you can make a case that we shouldn't allow government-owned organizations or largely government-controlled organizations. It's a little bit harder when it's a private company to make that case. So I think the solution is, and I mean, if we had a libertarian government with low taxes and free market capitalism and all that kind of thing, we would see a lot more wealth generated in Canada, and we'd see Canadians be able to buy up those mines and buy up those assets and develop them. We'd have the ability to do that, but we are under essentially a totalitarian regime in a lot of ways. Like our resource development, we can't just go out and develop resources. We can't extract oil out of the ground and get it to market. Governments across Canada block us getting our own product to market. And so when you have a government over here that is shutting down business and resource development and entrepreneurship left and right, and then you have this, in one sense, it's a totalitarian government in that in China, you can't create a competing political party, right? You can't say anything bad about the Communist Party. Your speech towards politics is very limited, but in almost every other way, when it comes to free markets, it's wide open. It's much easier to start a business in China, even as a Canadian, than it is to start a business in Canada. You know, it's much easier to do business over there, and they are reaping the rewards of that capitalism and that free market. Well, what if Canada had a free market similar to that of China? You know, we would be an economy on steroids. Then this mining company that's looking to sell its mine wouldn't have to sell it to a Chinese company because they're the only people rich enough to buy it. We'd have plenty of rich Canadians here that could buy it, and I think that you can just outshine China in that way, right? And you know, I don't think, you know, this idea that, you know, the thing that ended the Cold War, people often think that the Cold War was ended because the US had all these nukes and they were just a military superpower. No, what it was that the US built friends across the country through free trade. It just was, it just had an economy on steroids because of its free market policies, and all this trade with people endeared other countries to it. And you know, the communism just couldn't keep up. Like the totalitarianism over there couldn't keep up with the free market, unregulated relationships that were built. And so if Canada became like that, you know, and the States became like that, China would have to change its ways if it wanted to continue to be competitive on the world stage. So I think that would be the approach I would take, rather than use our government to ban sales and different things like that. You know, and then there, of course, there's a gray area, right? I mean, because on one hand you have like the Chinese state, on the other hand you have some Chinese businessmen that just, without any help and involvement with the state, you know, built up some wealth and wants to do business in Canada. But then you have everything in between. And where do you draw the line? That's tricky, and I don't have a clear answer for that. That would require a lot of study and being in position in government to make those calls, I think.
Well, I think one of the issues that we could look at to stop the problem is companies and industries lobbying to the government, period. Right. Yeah. So like if a Chinese government comes in and buys our like a resource company, they could lobby to their government for special favors anyways, because it would just be illegal. So, and I think that's a big problem with our society today, is the cronyism that's going on in our government, that's setting like these laws and these standards for everybody that just makes them get ahead and doesn't give opportunities to anybody else.
Yeah, and I mean, the only real way to end cronyism and lobbying is to just limit government, right? To make it so that it's no longer profitable to lobby at all. Because how can you can't really prohibit the CEO of a company from having a beer with a guy and talking about, hey, you know, when you're done in politics, there's a cushy job waiting for you here. You know, if things go my way, like, how do you stop that kind of thing, right? You can't. That's a form of lobbying. That's kind of how cronyism and the sausage is made with a lot of these things, right? And the goal, the thing is, you need to strip power from the politicians to be able to hand out any favors at all. And then it's like, you can have all the beers you want. You can pay them you can spend billions of dollars trying to bribe politicians, but if they're chained down to where they can't do anything but uphold the Constitution, then lobbying becomes mute. No one will do it anymore. And so I think that's the approach you have to take to lobbying.
Well, I think, go ahead, Marco.
Well, no, I was going to say, if you're trying to strip political power, I think that dovetails into a question I wanted to ask at some point in this interview, and that was about your views on can the liberty movement potentially be accelerated? Because I know it could go the other way as well. But when you look at a concept like democracy, right? You look at it could degenerate in a mob rule, absolutely. Or as we've seen in recent history, mainly in like other countries, or even here in British Columbia, do you think that direct democracy can have a positive effect on the liberty movement? I'm not sure if the Libertarian Party, like what their view is on it. You can get into that in a sec. But things like recalling potentially corrupt, bad politicians, a citizens initiative where you can potentially pass a new bill, pass like a new law to maybe curb government power. Things like referendums, maybe even electoral reform. Like there has to be a way as well where the people their power can maybe start flowing from the bottom up again, rather than just going, well, we're stuck with them for a few years. We just better suck it up and deal with it. Like how would you maybe approach that? Because I know it could go either way, like I said, but I feel like that there's probably some optimism there. There's a silver lining. There has to be.
Yeah, well, it is. I don't know whether direct democracy. I mean, the most direct form of democracy, as far as I'm concerned, is the market.
Right.
Where you actually put your money where your mouth is, put your values where your mouth is, and that's what's really missing from democracy, as far as I'm concerned, is skin in the game. So right now, anyone can have an opinion, no matter how shitty, and like maybe I think the minimum wage should be $20 an hour. Okay, now I don't own a business. I'm not paying anyone anything. I have zero skin in the game here. I just have an opinion from my armchair. Okay,
Yeah.
so now should that opinion count for anything if I'm not even employing anyone? I don't think it should. I think so. So I think your opinion has to be connected to personal responsibility somehow. Like, I said in one of the platform planks I had in the last election, which caused a bit of controversy. I think I lost some support over, and maybe there's some reasonable criticism, I think, of it, but it was the idea, like I was trying to think, how do you restrain politicians from sending our brave young men into wars for the military industrial complex that don't protect Canadians, that don't serve Canada's interests?
Right.
And one of the ways I thought of is, like, you're not allowed to vote as a politician. You're not allowed to vote in favor of going to war unless you submit yourself to the draft, or if you're infirm, you put up a sizable percentage of your personal wealth to fund the war effort. Because I know if I'm prime minister and I think war is necessary, I need to be willing to stand on the front lines with the people I'm ordering into battle to kill and die.
Mm-hmm.
Or I need to, if I'm not able to, I need to put my money where my mouth is. Like, this is serious business. And I like to think of most votes that way. Like, you shouldn't get a vote unless you're willing to be part of the solution. You don't get to have an opinion about other people's lives. And so some forms of direct democracy, I feel like, are just like creating mob rule on steroids. But I think if it's done right, like, where you have some kind of, it's creating some kind of contractual obligation where you are now agreeing to be part of the solution, then
Mm-hmm.
okay, that I think is an excellent way to go. I don't know what that looks like. I know the Pirate Party in Iceland did something with blockchain and crypto and voting that way that I think has some, like, reciprocal contractual agreement in it. So it'd be interesting to look to see how blockchain and crypto technology could be leveraged to do some kind of direct democracy like that. So I'd definitely be open to something like that, but I'd want to be very careful not to just give people the impression that their opinion matters if they have zero skin in the game.
Well, that's where something like, for example, citizens assemblies. I know that they would probably cost some money, but I mean, they were kind of pioneered in places like BC. They've been used in Ireland, all over the world, really. I think Australia and a bunch of places where you have obviously people of different viewpoints. You get your academics and politicians speak. But I wonder if, because I mean, as far as I know, like, no fistfights broke out despite differing opinions. And I wonder if maybe we can kind of leverage that kind of idea to advance certain things, whether it be cutting spending, taxes, civil liberties. Like, for example, not to get into it because that's a whole other show, but I remember, like, in recent years, Ireland used two citizens' assemblies, one on they eventually legalized same-sex marriage via referendum, and then one on abortion. Obviously,
Right.
that, which is huge, right, in a predominantly Catholic country. But I mean, if we could because I know, again, it could go the other way. right? And we know that we can't be ignorant of that fact. But again, that's kind of why I ask. And it's interesting that that you mentioned that it can go the other way, because we're living in a country right now where it seems like, or you mentioned the defense policy and how, like, a politician should have to kind of put their money where their mouth is. Yet I find it interesting that our commander in chief of the armed forces, maybe people don't realize this, it's still the Queen, represented by the governor general, who would have to take the. In other places, it would be the president, right? It's just
and I believe our military has to swear an oath to protect the royal family again. Right?
Yeah, yeah, it's bizarre.
Yeah, no, I think there's some. I should preface this by saying, look, I am basically an anarchist.
Okay.
I don't even think anarchist is enough freedom for me. So I'm whatever's past an anarchist. I'm always going to want more freedom, no matter what the situation is. And so, to me, like a privatized world is probably better than one where there's anything. But so the question to me about direct democracy, or this versus that, is what gets us closer, what gets us more freedom tomorrow than we have today. And ultimately, that's my philosophy: more freedom tomorrow than we have today. And what gets us there, right? Yeah. And because I don't think there's an end point called we've now attained libertopia and we can stop. I think it's always a struggle to hold on to what freedom we have and to push for a little bit more all the time. So it's a process and a grind that we have to embrace and enjoy and be happy warriors about. But that being said, okay, so let's talk about direct democracy. I kind of like Switzerland's model, where things are decentralized, right? I think decentralization is key. And I mean, they have a rotating head of state, right? I mean, they kind of have a committee. And so they don't have a prime minister or a president per se. They just take turns being the chair of the government, right? And I kind of like that, because it gets rid of this cult of personality thing, where everything is Trudeau's fault, and all we have to do is vote him out and everything will be good. And then the other thing is, like, they have direct democracy at the local level, where, okay, even things like where a statue is going to be put in the town, we're going to put the statue up. We all get together in a citizens assembly or whatever, and we decide where the statue is going to go together. Okay, that's good. I like that. That's much preferable. And so I think decentralization is the key. And, Nassim Taleb, who wrote Anti-Fragile, Things That Came from Disorder, and he just recently wrote a book called Skin in the Game. And it's this whole idea, again, of you got to have skin in the game for your opinion to matter. He had a quote in there that kind of resonates with me, where he said, what are my politics? Well, I'm a libertarian at the national level. I'm a Republican at the state level. I'm a Democrat at the municipal level. And I'm a socialist at the family level. And I thought, okay, that actually has some merit to me, because that's probably true. When you live in close confines with each other, like, say, even something like a condominium complex, right? Is a condo board preferable to just a landlord who hands rules down and says this is how things are going to be? Yeah, probably it is. So maybe, that would be kind of a democratic way of dealing with issues that affect everyone in that place. Our lives are so intertwined in this condominium that, what one person does with their apartment affects what everyone else does. How our plumbing works and all the infrastructure that holds this condominium together affects everyone. And so we should all maybe come to an agreement on that, right?
Yeah.
And a city is very similar. Like, there has to be some rules in the commons. Like, we can't litter all over the place. We can't drop turds everywhere, even though Newsom left San Francisco a giant turd pile with his policies. So there have to be some rules, and those rules, ideally, you would want the majority of people whose lives are affected by them to probably have a say. So having some democracy at that level. But then when you get to the larger level of like the nation state, and where we should let people have maximum freedom at that level, and go from there. And Walter Block wrote a great article on, it was a libertarian about libertarian gun control, right? And his point was this: like, if there's 3 or 4 people in a phone booth, a gun is not a defensive weapon; it's an offensive weapon. Like, it can't be used defensively, because if you fire it, you're going to kill an innocent. Like, if one of the persons starts attacking you, you can't defend yourself without killing an innocent. Okay, so maybe only a knife should be allowed in a phone booth. Now, in a crowded public park, is is a fully automatic machine gun a defensive weapon? No, you're going to be killing people. So he said there has to be some understanding of geography and population density when it comes to whether you're classifying a weapon as something that can be used defensively or something that can only be used offensively.
Mhm.
You know, like you wouldn't use a nuke to defend yourself. You can't use a nuke defensively unless, and he writes this in his paper, you're defending from a planetoid or an asteroid that's going to hit Earth. Okay, then you should be able to own a nuke to defend against that, for example, right? There would be constraints around how you would use it, and there'd be watchdogs, and there'd be huge responsibility that would limit your freedom in all sorts of ways if you wanted to take on the responsibility of owning that.
But
So
that's true though. Like, because you don't need the same sort of gun maybe for protection in the city as you do as in like Nunavut, where you're facing polar bears, right?
yeah,
Where you might want
so
something a little more high caliber.
and there's no one for miles around is owning a machine gun. Should that be illegal? No, especially if you're not taking it off your property, that you're not hurting anyone with it. And look, if the Russians come over the Arctic Circle, I mean, it could be a good defensive weapon, right? So I mean, these things have to be taken into context, and that's why at the large federal level, maximum freedom and give people as much leeway as possible. But once things get more condensed and congested, and we're sharing the same streets and the same infrastructure, and we're all paying into it, okay, now we have to figure out how we're going to make decisions about the rules on those streets and different things like that. So that makes some sense to me.
That's a perfect dovetail because into the question I was about to ask, because we're talking about rules for the commons and all that stuff, and how we're going to have maximum freedom. So I guess my next question then would be, okay, let's say we're hitting the reboot button on our Constitution, right? Because let's be honest, right? I mean, I noticed that a lot of libertarians in Canada, they piggyback onto the American style a lot, and I get it, right? Jefferson, Madison, Thomas Paine, whoever else wrote a lot of good stuff. That was a really good Constitution, even if there were some imperfections. But as we see over there, as we see here, I mean, here it's like more kind of a mishmash. There's unwritten from Britain. There's written stuff with the Charter and the Bill of Rights and all that. But if you were to hit the reboot button, like, what would you include in the Constitution? What would you take out, or would you not? Like, let's say libertarians get in tomorrow. Is there any sort of damage control we can do like right away? Can we implement property rights in the Charter? Are there certain provisions we can take away? I know it'd be an uphill battle, but like, what can we do?
Yeah, well, constitutional reform was one of my platform planks, and how I would redo the Constitution. First of all, I'd get rid of equalization payments, which are in the Constitution. That's why we can't get rid of them, and they're always a political contentious item, kind of. But yeah, you would want something similar to the Bill of Rights, but I'd want to include property rights in there. I'd want to include freedom of speech, freedom to bear arms, all those kinds of things shall not be infringed, and then some sort of agreement over what confederation means, right? So in other words, if you're going to join our confederation under this Constitution, here are your obligations, and the main obligation would be to allow free trade and that sort of thing across your thing. And then I would leave everything up to the states or the provinces into how, I wouldn't want the federal government interfering in that. And then there's kind of a philosophical debate that we could have about, okay, well, if the Constitution says, you can't, like, maybe a requirement to be part of confederation is you can't infringe property rights, you can't infringe gun rights, you can't infringe this, you can't infringe that. What happens then if a province infringes on those things? Well, then their status in Constitution, in confederation, I think becomes under scrutiny, and maybe there's a mechanism to kick them out of confederation. And so, I would prefer to see, like, right now, it's very difficult to leave confederation. The federal government is so powerful and it's such a parasite on all the provinces that it doesn't want to lose them. So it makes it very difficult for provinces to leave confederation. I would prefer a government so small and constrained that we could kick people. We would rather kick people out of confederation for not abiding by what the group of provinces has signed on to than anything.
So how do you feel about because in the Libertarian Party itself, there's such a wide spectrum of people. Like some people feel there should be a little more state. Some people, like you, as you said, you're an anarchist, believes really there should be no state. So how do you feel you bridge that gap to make a platform that will appeal more to the mass Canadians and not just the libertarians?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the struggle. Like, first of all, I should say we're not trying to create a platform that's going to appeal to the mass Canadians. That's what we would, if we did that, our platform would look like the Liberal Party's platform or the Conservative Party's platform.
Conservatives, yeah.
Because that's what their job is. And in fact, I mean, that's what they do. They run polls to figure out what Canadians think. And then they write their platform to reflect that, right? And that's what you have to do to win elections. You have to reflect and amplify culture. You can't challenge it. And our job, as I see it, is to challenge culture, to create cognitive dissonance, to say things that are unpopular. And most of the people that are in the party feel the same way. And so our job is to challenge culture. So then the question becomes, well, okay, we're made up of essentially 4 kind of factions, right? We have constitutionalists who think we just limit to the Constitution. Then we have classical liberals who, they're a bit more open to government, when it comes to things like fire department and maybe a bit of healthcare and things like that. Then you have minarchists who are just like kind of Ayn Rand objectivists, night watchman, state only, police, military, courts. That's the government's only job. And then you have guys like me who are essentially anarcho-capitalists who think, yeah, there's nothing the private industry can't do that government's doing right now. So, we go back to in the 70s, there, if there's one thing a libertarian hates more than a liberal and a conservative, it's another libertarian. We squabble over minor details, right? And
big time.
And this happened very early in the advent of libertarian parties, which, in the States and Canada were formed in the early 70s. And they realized very quickly in the States that this was going to be a problem. So they agreed to set aside their differences and focus on the 95% of the things that they agreed on. And this was called the Dallas Accord because it was struck at a Dallas convention, I think in 1975 or something. And it's kind of become my mantra as well. Look, guys, it's great to have debates and stuff behind closed doors. We all enjoy it. We all enjoy, like, we're just, we're curmudgeons and we're feisty, and that's what I love about us. And sometimes that's what I hate about us. But, our job when it comes to this organization, we have a clear job, and that job is to connect people to the message of liberty. And we're going to focus on the things that we all agree on and how we're going to do that. And we're going to set aside minor differences by understanding that me out on my own, I'm not going to connect with as many people as I'm going to do in this organization. And I often equate it back to firefighting. We often have an incident commander on a fire ground who is making bad decisions. But the only thing worse than not following the orders of that incident commander is having an incident commander that makes no decisions or have no incident commander. A bad decision we can recover from and we can adjust. And then we can talk about it afterwards behind closed doors and talk about how stupid that was. And we need a new leader here and that sort of thing, right? And this is what drives me nuts about libertarians. And I'm already starting to see it happen in the States a little bit. They have a new presidential and vice presidential candidate, Joe Jorgensen and Spike Cohen. And, Spike Cohen, I guess, did some kind of podcast shirtless the other day. And, that's a questionable decision. Like, I wouldn't do that. I don't think it's a good idea. But what worries me more than that are the people that are immediately throwing him under the bus and saying, this is terrible. This is why I can't have good things. And like, either support him or get out of the party, because just by staying in the party and criticizing your leaders constantly in the run up to the election, you're not helping. Okay. The time for that kind of discussion is after the election. I mean, we had Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, and now we have Joe Biden. And like these people are being accused of sexual assault and rape and all sorts of crazy stuff. There's stuff they've done on camera that's just ridiculous. If a libertarian did that, you would never hear the end of it from the libertarians. But the thing we can learn from Republicans and Democrats and conservatives and liberals is they get behind their organization and their leader, no matter their their faults, right? And that's what
Right.
we have to learn, is that unity of action and go from there. But libertarians are very individualistic. If there's anything wrong, we jump out, kind of. And so my big job here is to try to herd cats, right? It's try to keep everyone together. And the way you do that isn't with a stick. It isn't with party discipline or anything like that. The way we always herded cats on the farm is we put down a warm saucer of freshly milked milk, and the cats come running and eat. So you have to provide something of value. So that's the trick. I find it's difficult to do. But I want to encourage libertarians to stick together here and ride it out. I've made a lot of bad decisions as a leader, and you could question a lot of things, and I question a lot of the things I've done, right? And get rid of me if you think I'm making bad decisions. But if you're on my team, like, let's do this together, support each other, support me, and I'll support you, and we got to get this done. And that's how I think we need to, like, if libertarians could just find that gear where we recognize that just because the organization isn't doing everything we want and saying everything we want and making mistakes that we wouldn't make, we can't just throw it out. We have to recognize that we're going to get more done with that imperfect group of people than we will going off on our own and playing ball on our own and just being a curmudgeon and a cynic and a criticizer from the sideline. That helps no one. That just harms everything. So be unified and tolerate bad decisions and work towards improving things and finding better ways of doing things.
Well, I think what part of the problem is what you pointed to earlier was, you said the party isn't really there to be elected, it's there to change the culture. So you have that group of people who, aren't really about being elected. They're about, changing the culture and showing the bad things of what's going on in the government society today. And then you have another group of people who are like, look, we want our values to be elected, right? So now in the States, for example, you have that two faction in itself. You have JoJo's faction, who she's a pretty serious person and wants to be elected. And then you have the other guy who's part of Vermin's faction. And those guys were all about just, showing up the system, showing how bad the system is. And they have, they weren't about getting elected. They were about just showing up the corruptness and everything. So it's hard to bring those two types of people together.
It is difficult, for sure. Yeah, there's always, it's we call them usually the pragmatists and the purists, right? And I tried to strike a balance in the past of, like, for example, in 2015, my platform looked very similar to what the PPC's platform looked like in terms of our economic and our tax policy and stuff like that. And that's no mistake. I mean, the people that helped us develop that tax and economic platform, I think, also helped the PPC develop theirs. But I realized that, look, we're not going to get elected. That is a delusion, right? It's delusion. Even if we have the nicest, just slightly more liberty platform, we're not. I mean, and so, look, if you want to get elected, join one of the mainstream parties. Otherwise, I think your job has got to be to shift culture. And actually, it's the purists that control culture. If you look at the national debate stage here in Canada, you have the Green Party, the NDP, pulling both the Liberals and the Conservative Party further left, right? You have Nutty Elizabeth May and these crazy, basically socialist NDPers, like ideologues to the thousandth degree, right? Meanwhile, you have no ideologue pulling anyone towards more liberty up there. And so, one of my pitches to Maxime Bernier when we were encouraging him to run for CPC leadership was, look, if you get up there and have just a moderate libertarian message, right now you are going to look like a right-wing extremist and a complete nutcase. But if I'm up there being like hardcore income taxes, theft, legalize all the guns and drugs and hookers, and you're going to look like you're going to look like the sane guy on that stage. You need someone up there. You need a purist pulling that Overton window towards liberty, and so it's Elizabeth May that is really controlling this environmental green agenda. I mean, the amount of influence, you cannot discount how much influence the green movement has had on politics. and that's because they stick to their guns and their principles and their purity. Okay?
Well, I think part of that is because that side of the faction, those purists, they go out and they'll protest. They'll handcuff. Elizabeth May handcuffs herself to the fences and for the pipelines, and that gets news and that gets more people involved in everything. I think more libertarians need to start doing stuff like that under the libertarian name, if that's the way the culture wants to be. If you want to push culture, you're not going to do that from your basement.
No,
you know what I mean? Right? You got to get out there and actually do something. So, and that's why I think with these protests going on today against these anti-lockdown protests, I think, I know a lot of Ontario libertarians are going out there and spreading the message, going, this is what we've been talking about. But I think we need more of that to push that culture more in our direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Yeah, Elizabeth May, I mean, before she was ever elected, she was just a gadfly, right? I mean, she was on the steps of legislature and parliament, always protesting something, always pulling some kind of publicity stunt, always trying to get her agenda out there. But I mean, the thing about Elizabeth is that she never sacrificed her principles or her values, right? And somehow she got a seat. I mean, that's who we need to look at for success here. Even though I agree with almost nothing she says, that's the strategy she used is something that we need to look at very closely and learn from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. See, this is what kind of troubles me, right? Is there's this constant struggle because, when you were mentioning earlier how we have those two factions, right? At what point then do you say, like, should you still have the party just to take away a few votes from the big guys and then just keep trying to push the overtime window? Or do you take a step back, disband for a few years, keep trying to push the overtime window, hope that culture moves another way, looking for a new voice, then jump in, like, say, the PPC at least tried? Because I know that the Green Party, I don't know what their goals were for 30 or 40 years, however long that they existed, but it's always lose, 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 lose. And then finally there was that 1 year where they started winning. And then, do we just, does the Libertarian Party just keep lingering around like the Greens and then hope that we get at least that one seat? Or do you stand back and then rebuild?
Well, I think that, this year is definitely a rebuild year for us. I mean, the PPC, took a lot of wind out of our sails. But, this is a grind. The thing is, if you want to get good at podcasting or get good at writing, you just got to do it every day, no matter whether you're getting published or whether anyone's viewing it. You just have to keep grinding and just hope that investment pays off over time. And so I don't see the Libertarian Party going away anytime soon. I could never get behind, the Conservative Party. I couldn't even really get behind the PPC because they didn't have a statement of principles. I mean, we almost merged parties. Max just had to get me a statement of principles and a constitution, some basic documents so I could reassure members that there was going to be it was going to be beholden to some principles, because we were worried that, look, it's just going to become like another party. If it starts getting popular, its message is just going to shift to the left and it's going to be focused on getting votes rather than shifting culture. And sure enough, that's kind of what it looks like it became. And it was probably that way from the start. I mean, Max, he could have split from this DPC by sending out tweets like taxation is theft, or legalize all the drugs, or end all foreign wars, or anything that libertarians care about. But instead, he started talking about multiculturalism. And, obviously that was a play to what was going to serve Max the best, which is getting. I mean, the largest group of disenfranchised Canadians were basically populists who were worried about borders, globalism, and multiculturalism. So he spoke to those people and got in front of that parade. And he shifted from being the Libertarian candidate in the CPC leadership race against the populist Kelly Leach, who he criticized for her values tests and all these other things. And he basically became Kelly Leach because those are the people where he was going to pick up most support and the most votes. So we should have known right from the beginning, Max was looking to be pragmatic. He wanted to get votes. And that's what you have to do if you want to get votes. You have to, what Max did was perfectly rational. If you think votes is the way we got to go. But as I wrote numerous articles over and over again, the only logical course that goes is towards eventually becoming exactly the CPC and having their exact policies again. So, I mean, because you just have to do that. I mean, you have to do what's going to make you popular. So, you know, I don't follow that strategy. I follow the, you know, look, we need radicals. Like Ron Paul wasn't going to win the presidential election. But he stood on that stage and he converted millions of people to liberty because he said, legalize all the drugs, taxation is theft. We're going to bring our troops home right now. Central banking is the devil. And, you know, like stuff that no reasonable or decent conservative would ever say, he was saying. And that's what got people. It was that radical, pure message. And what we need is someone on the political stage to do that. I would love it to be a member of parliament. I was hoping it was going to be Bernier on the national stage. It wasn't. I would love it if someone else, like maybe a Scott Reed or someone else. But of course, you can't do that as easily in Canada, because as soon as you stand up and say something like that, you get kicked out of your caucus and get kicked out of your party. Ron Paul didn't have to worry about that kind of thing. He wasn't going to, there was no caucus for him to get kicked out of. There was no, they couldn't revoke his membership. I mean, that he was allowed to say what he said. There's no party discipline per se there, right? So
no, there was just media discipline when he was running.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've ever seen him. He's seen him on the talk shows when he was running, and they just scold him.
I mean, he wasn't even in, and he didn't even show up in the polls. I mean, they did all sorts of things, marginalized. Yeah, the media continually does that, right? But so tell us a little bit about your podcast. Oh yeah, so I have a podcast. It's been going for about a year now. I podcast with a guy named David Birnbaum. He actually approached me to do the podcast, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of want to, you know, I should get more content out there. So we put out 2 podcasts a week called The Liberty Experts. You can find it on Apple iTunes, or we're on YouTube as well. And you can find the podcast and that YouTube channel if you go to my website, timmoen.net. It has all the information there, and you can see some of the latest articles I've written. I've written stuff on the gun ban and on COVID-19. And so that's where you can go to find all that stuff, timmoen.net.
Perfect. Well, we're almost pretty much out of time here. We're over an hour. So anything else you want to tell us here, Tim, about, the direction the party's going? Or about yourself, or what you're doing now?
I mean, the party, we're focused on building and grinding it out, continue to do what's right, not what's necessarily popular, right? And you know, I've had conversations with Frank Vaughn from the PPC and a bunch of other PPCers that are kind of unhappy right now, and so I suspect we're going to see more growth over the next little while in the run up. So our job is just to keep putting the foot down, doing the right thing. No matter what it costs us or what the sacrifice is. And I think doing the right thing pays off over time. You know, it might feel like it's not going to, might feel like, you know, you're just banging your head against the wall, but you know, there's peaks and valleys. And right now I think we're starting to come out of a valley into a bit of a peak. And this COVID-19 thing is really opening up a lot of eyes. And I'm getting a lot of messages from people who are saying, you know, this COVID-19 is pushing me libertarian right now. You know, I just don't understand these lockdowns, and you know, so
that's what I'm talking about. The movement's growing because of the government over-regulation. They're doing it to themselves.
And one of the projects I'm working on right now is a white paper for the Libertarian Party of Canada on the COVID response. So I'm doing it with a bunch of co-authors. I'm hoping to bring Walter Block into the mix as well. I think he'll help us out with it. But just go through a timeline of the COVID pandemic, government response, you know, highlight the ethics of it, because I don't think there's a lot of good stuff on libertarian ethics when it comes to pandemic response, and what the government, when can you use force, when can't you use force, what's permissible and not. As there's a lot of kind of nuances there to consider, and then what are all the unintended consequences from this lockdown. We're hoping to catalog a whole lot of them, so we have a nice compendium there going forward. So that's what I'm working on right now, so stay tuned for that.
Awesome. Sounds exciting. Well, I'd like to thank you for coming on today. It was an awesome chat, great interview. You can go check out Tim on his website. You can check us out on mindyourdamnbusiness.com on pretty much every podcast platform out there. And I'd like to thank our partners down south, think-liberty.com, for helping us out, for getting us on all these platforms. Until next week, guys. Also, July 1st, get out there, let your voices be heard wherever your legislation building is, or come to Ottawa, come to Toronto, Edmonton.
Let's make Canada Day Independence Day, right?
That's right.
Our day to celebrate our subjectivity to the crown.
There you go. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Let's get this word out there. Till next week, guys. We'll have some videos on along the way and some reports for you along the way. We'll see you soon. Have a great day, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim.